Chapter 44, Guardian Angels. Saturday, July 25th, 2308. The next morning, brother and sister woke early. They crawled out from under the jungle gym, stretched, and wiped the dew from their clothes. Ashley looked at her brother and thought he looked as if he'd been through a war. She realized she must look the same and took a deep breath. "Can we go home now?" Jeff asked. Ashley stared at the tree line for a long time, debating whether they should head home or out to forage in the city. She pointed to the nearby park bathroom. "I gotta go." "Me too," Jeff agreed. A few minutes later, standing in the morning sunlight, face and hands washed, Ash felt better than she thought possible, having spent the night beneath a slide. "We can't go home, Jeff," Ashley said. "We need to find out what happened. We need a library. There's got to be something in the news." Ashley thought Jeff seemed to be handling everything rather well. "You okay?" she asked. Jeffrey nodded. "I miss Mom and Dad. I want to go home." Ashley said nothing. She held his hand as they made their way down the canyon to find a public library. Finding a local library branch wasn't difficult. Shortly after opening, Ash and Jeff settled into a wired carrel where they scanned the latest news reports. There was nothing about her father being shot or their home being raided. The most recent stories involving their father were about the Epsilon explosion out in the desert. He was mentioned in a piece about Pierce's suicide, but nothing recent, nothing from yesterday. 20 minutes later, Ash had some idea of what her father's latest projects had been. Anything compelling she read aloud for Jeff. She was amazed he hadn't complained about being hungry, tired, or bored. Ash had assigned him the task of lookout, and he dutifully nudged her whenever someone wandered too close. They remained undisturbed, free to peruse the public terminal to their heart's content. Ashley's Journal, Saturday, July 25th, 2308. We're at the library. I'm entering this online. I don't know what to do. Dad said we should go to Mexico. That's insane. I'm not doing that. First, I want to know what happened. I want to know who killed him and why. I know I should be sad, but I'm not. I'm just angry. There's nothing in the news about him. Nothing recent, anyhow. I'm reading about how his first invention, the blue goo, now mass-produced for less than 17 cents a liter, revolutionized medicine. He shot to the top ranks of several fields overnight. He didn't seem to have much trouble staying there either. There's lots of online controversy about the Centaur war tanks. I was alive when that happened. I kind of remember it. That was when Uncle Jeffrey was killed. Ash tried to piece together the news reports she was reading now, with snippets of conversations she'd overheard back then. Names came back to her. Tasha Vangen, Major General Crothers. She remembered the people who'd taken over the project had gone crazy, not following the proper procedures. She remembered the controversy, the threat her father could have been held accountable for the massacre and imprisoned. Almost 1 million people had been killed. In the end, he wasn't even arrested, but it had been a tense time. The war was over and everyone agreed that her father was responsible for that. He hadn't been charged with treason, but the inevitability of betrayal at the higher levels hung over him like a black cloud. Ashley could tell even then, losing his brother had changed her father in a profound way. She looked over at Jeffrey. He'd abandoned his post as team lookout and had activated the other terminal, but was now snoozing. It didn't matter. Even with both of them looking, there was still nothing about the murder of their parents. Something drew Ashley's attention from the screen. Several adults were looking in her direction. A Chinese man across the room caught and held her gaze. He was wearing traditional silk clothes, a hat, and small round sunglasses. His long white hair was pulled into a loose braid behind him. He looked as though he was trying to communicate something to her, but movement to her right distracted her. 4 men approached the carrel. Ash shook Jeffrey, rousing him, but in his drowsy condition he was in no shape to run. The 4 men were dressed in street clothes, but it was obvious they were law enforcement agents of some sort. Ash noticed they were wearing their sunglasses inside. She wanted to roll her eyes, but she didn't dare look away from them. "Ashley and Jeffrey Fox, I need to ask you to come with me." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Ashley said. "You don't have a choice about it," he replied. "I can scream, I can call the police." "Knock yourself out," he said, stepping into arm's reach. As the agent grabbed her shoulder, Ashley leapt from the booth, kicking him in the crotch. He went down with a grunt, obstructing the other men's path to the children. Ashley pulled Jeff from the carrel and they slipped into the rows of books. The library wasn't huge, but it was large enough. Ash and Jeff sprinted down the narrow aisles, moving faster than the adults could in such confined spaces. They zigged and zagged, slipped around assistants, and stayed quiet in their flight. As they neared the front door, with one wrong turn, it was over. They came out into the central lobby. The four-man squad stood right in front of them. The agent she'd kicked stepped up and backhanded her across the face, knocking Ashley from her feet. The other civilians in the lobby all stopped what they were doing. There was one gray-haired man who looked as large and as dangerous as the agents. He'd been sitting near Ash and Jeff all morning. Ash recalled he'd arrived at the same time as she and Jeff. He'd even held the door open for them. Now he stood with the other civilians, watching. One of the soldiers grabbed Jeff's arm. Ashley scrambled to her feet. The agent who'd hit her stepped in and restrained her before she could reach her brother. He held her arms back and leaned down to her ear. "You're quite the brat, aren't you?" He looked up to the other plainclothesman. "Let's get this garbage out of here." As the soldiers turned toward the main doors with their charges in tow, the gray-haired man stepped forward, in front of the doors, obstructing their progress. He held up a badge and asked, "Is there a problem here?" One of the soldiers reached for his gun, but the man with the badge stepped forward and struck him in the jaw. The agent went down, unconscious. The men holding Ashley and Jeff couldn't draw their weapons in a reasonable amount of time. The gray-haired man was already holding his, pointing it at the only agent with free hands. "Anyone else wants to play, I open fire. Now let the children go while we wait here for the police." The soldiers hesitated. The gray-haired man cocked his pistol and switched his aim to the forehead of the man holding Ashley. He released her, and his partner released Jeff. The gray-haired man gestured for Ash and Jeff to get behind him, and out of the building. "Get out of here." Ashley opened the door and pulled Jeff out with her. As she stepped out of the library, she realized she'd seen him before. He was more than familiar. She'd seen him at her home years ago for a barbecue. He was a friend of their father's. She was sure of it. Ashley heard the lead agent threaten her father's friend. "Look, the kids are gone, fine, but we're not sticking around for the cops." "See this badge?" the gray-haired man answered. "That's Defense Security Service. You're not cleared to know anything about this project, not even those children's names. The knowledge alone can put you in Leavenworth for 20 years. You're waiting here, you're getting shot. It's up to you." As they reached the sidewalk, Ash and Jeff heard the gunfire erupt behind them. Then the gray-haired man, Ashley remembered his name, Ross. He was a soldier, Major Ross. Now he was out of the building and moving down the steps. "Run," Ross said, "run!" Ashley grabbed Jeff's hand and sprinted down the block. Behind her, the library doors burst open again. She didn't look back, but heard Ross and the agents trading gunfire behind her. Bullets whizzed by her head, and then she and Jeffrey made a turn, carrying them out of the line of fire. Back at the library, Ross had ducked behind a parked car, pinning the agents to the doorway and preventing their pursuit. Chapter 45. Major Kelly Ross. Saturday morning, July 25th, 2308. From his mobile command center, Von Kalt watched the library's surveillance feeds. He wanted to know who'd been responsible for the soldiers who'd gone missing yesterday. Stanwood had dismissed it as a rival department, but Von Kalt couldn't let it go. Now watching the shootout between Ross and his agents, he couldn't help but think about the soldier. Only a few short weeks ago, Von Kalt had seen the man killed in an explosion. He was later told Ross had survived, and clearly that information had been correct. Ross would have known enough to leave the radio transmitters, but then why remove the bodies in the first place? The shootout hadn't been anything special. It was clear that Ross wasn't shooting to kill. In fact, he was going out of his way not to kill these men, just as he hadn't killed the agent at the taxi stand. Whatever had happened to his agents in the forest, it hadn't been Ross. It certainly hadn't been the children. The issue tugged at Von Kalt's mind. Someone close to the device had been responsible. The Metacron wanted to know who that was, and so did Von Kalt. "Dr. Angus MacPhail," Stanwood said, interrupting Von Kalt's cerebral locomotive. "You arrested him, didn't you?" Von Kalt asked, smoothly shifting tracks. He lawyered up and returned to Glasgow. So pack your gear. We had no jurisdiction there. That's why it's just going to be you and me." "We're just going?" "We'll be working with Scotland Yard and Interpol." "Do they know that?" Von Kalt asked. "What?" "I think you're making a mistake." "Surprise, surprise. What do you want with MacPhail anyhow?" "He's got something he needs to give me." "You honestly just want to up and leave the kids?" "They're just kids. We know Ross has them. When they turn up, we'll come back." A car swerved to the curb in front of Ashley and Jeff. They froze. Ross popped open the hatch. "Get in," he said. Ross looked to be bleeding from at least 2 gunshot wounds to the midsection and another to his left shoulder. "Hurry up," he said with a calm that belied his injuries. Ash approached the car, Jeff trailing along behind her. "Come on, they're going to be here any second and I need your help." Ashley put her right hand in her back pocket and slipped into the transport. Jeff climbed in and sat next to her. The door closed behind them and they lifted off. Ross put the vehicle in gear and scrambled the booster drives to get them away from the agents. Once cruising safely in city traffic, he engaged the autopilot, took a deep breath, and turned his chair from the console to face them. "So, now when you're running, there are 3 things you need to be aware of." Ross didn't waste time. "Running?" Jeff asked. 3 rules." Ross snapped his fingers, cutting off Jeff's interruption. 1. Family first. Trust no one. Trust each other, but no one else. As long as you've got each other, that's all that matters. The grizzled veteran waited for some kind of acknowledgement. Ash nodded and elbowed Jeff, who did likewise. Number 2. Never go anywhere you can't escape from. No small places, no confined spaces. Know your exits or don't go in. Brother and sister nodded. The message was clear. 3. Never go anywhere twice. Not ever. Never go anywhere twice. Repeat them now. 1, 2, 3, please. Ross coughed. His hand came away bloody. 1, 2, 3, he said, grabbing a napkin from the side console. Ashley looked to Jeff and nodded. "Family first," Ashley said. "Family first," Jeff repeated. 2, Ash started. "Don't get trapped," Jeff jumped in. "Don't get trapped," Ashley nodded. And 3, "Never go anywhere twice," they said together. "That's right. It's a big world, plenty to see, and never get bored. Okay now, 4 things you need to survive. Some people say 3, I say 4. Here they are. Food, water, information, and energy. To get any of them, you can use cash." This took a second to sink in for Ashley. Jeff remained quiet. Ross relaxed into the chair and took slow breaths. "Trust no one? What about you?" Ashley asked. "Don't trust me either. You don't know me from Adam. But I'm wounded and I'm not trying to hurt you at the moment. I'd say right now I need your help more than you need mine. Besides, you have a knife in your hand, don't you?" "You worked for my father," Ashley said, ignoring his comment about the micronics. "I did, until yesterday." "What happened?" "You saw what happened," Ross answered. "I saw..." Ashley let the statement hang unfinished. "Where have you been?" Ross asked. "What do you mean?" Ashley replied. "You disappeared." "Disappeared? We lost you. We were ready to pick you up last night, but you vanished off our scanners." "What are you talking about? We spent the night in a park," Ashley said. "Under a slide," Jeffrey added. "You what?" "The park was crawling with feds until after midnight." "Not where we were," Ashley said. "We didn't see anyone," Jeff added. "No kidding." Ross coughed again. "What are we going to do?" Jeff asked. "We're going to a safe house," Ross replied. "Not Mexico?" Ashley asked. "No. Why would you do that? That's a horrible idea. What's in Mexico?" Ross asked. "Mexicans," Ashley replied. "We're not going to Mexico. We're going to Canada. But not yet. We need IDs first, and that's going to take a couple days," Ross answered. Ashley glanced over at her little brother. Jeffrey followed the conversation intently. Ash noticed he didn't miss a gesture or subtle bit of emphasis. "Are you going to tell us what happened to our parents?" Jeff asked. Ross coughed. "You were there." "But what happened?" Jeff asked. "Why?" "That could take years. Hell, I'm not even sure I know." Ross took a deep breath and coughed again, pressing his hand to his side. "Are you okay?" Ashley asked. "I'll be fine." Ross plugged his phone into the console. "Hold on. I have to make a call." He dialed the line and leaned back, trying to catch his breath. The call was connected, and Chief Warrant Officer Reed's face filled the terminal. "What's up?" he asked. "I was beginning to get worried. You okay?" "I need you to send a trauma kit over to St. Vincent's." "What's up? You don't want to talk this way?" Reed asked in a thought over the amplifier. Out loud he said, "We've got a few there, courtesy of our old friend, just in case." "Fox asked us to keep the 5th wall up, keeping up appearances." Ash has the mic in her pocket. "Great. I'm sending you the intercepts now. Pretty sure it's the National Intelligence Director and his deputy, but I want confirmation. Did you get anything?" "Sure. Copy that." "We've got new units in the Decanter, but there's no rush. We're 6 months out, however you look at it. I need 24 hours before I can travel if you haven't already wrapped up things by then." "Any progress on the visas?" Ross asked. Everything's approved and in the pipeline. It'll take 48 to 72 hours. I'll keep you updated. Mañana, mi amigo. See ya. Ross relaxed back into the chair. Jeff looked over to Ashley, pleading with her to ask the question in his eyes. Despite their separation in age, Ashley and Jeff were still close enough to understand each other with a glance. Tell us, Ashley said. Tell you what? Ross asked. Tell us what you know, Ashley answered. I'll give you a rundown, sure, he coughed, but lightly. I've known your father since we were kids. I went to school with him and a bunch of the other guys. Most of them were destined for greatness. I was destined for the officer corps, infantry. I did a good job most of the time, which means I excelled at killing bad guys. Eventually karma caught up with me and took my leg. When your father approached me with the 3 a.m. project, I have to admit I was interested. There were 8 of us, 9 including your dad. You may think your old man was a bookworm scientist, but he was not. I'm telling you, he's one of the toughest guys I ever met. His code name was Red. Ross leaned back in the chair. Talking seemed to be making him tired. Who was on the phone? Reed. He's chasing down some of your dad's friends, making sure anyone who might be in danger is safe. In danger from the guy who shot my dad? Why didn't you stop him? Believe it or not, your dad asked me not to. What do you mean? Ashley asked. I mean your dad trusted that guy. I don't think he believed he would hurt him. Isn't anyone going to do anything? Ashley was getting angry. Here's the situation, Ross said. Our government is fractured. It's at war with itself, and you two have just become the equivalent of a castle or a mountain pass. You represent tide-turning potential. What's his name? Ashley asked. The man with the gun. Tell me his name. They're looking for you, and the less you know, the safer you are. What do they want with us? We're just kids, Ashley said. You're not just anything. They want you. They want the evidence. Ashley held up the prototype. This evidence? That's nothing. You are the evidence, said Ross. Ashley turned to look out the window. After a long pause, Ross spoke. When negotiations between the government and your father broke down, things unraveled pretty quickly and everyone started improvising. The people in Washington panicked. They were very scared by something your father had been working on. Those agents in the forest, Ashley. What happened to those agents last night? Those soldiers who were chasing you. Did you kill them? Last night? Ashley asked. Jeff looked up at her. 4 soldiers were killed. Did you do it? What happened? Do you remember any of it? We didn't kill anyone. I remember all of it. Ashley looked at Jeff. Jeff nodded. It was Mr. Dunkirk, Ashley said. It was. We saw him in the trail, just before they caught up to us. But we were running, and we couldn't see what happened. We heard them fighting. We heard gunshots, Jeff said. It was him? He was there? Ross asked. His shirt was covered in blood, Ashley added. Bobby was there too. We saw him too, Jeff said. Who's Bobby? Ross asked. Bobby Dunkirk, Ash replied. Ross cleared his throat. While you guys were at camp, your father went missing for almost 3 weeks. He vanished somewhere in the D.C. area after a briefing at the White House. He didn't turn up until yesterday when you saw him at home. We figured out where he was and who had him. We talked to him, but he asked us to stand down. He wanted to let this play out. None of us thought it would go this far. What are you going to do now? Ashley asked. What did your father tell you to do? He said to head south, to Mexico, until you found us. Mexico. Right. Okay, sure. If you're ever all alone, that's the thing to do. But since I found you, we're going to do a little better than that. We're going to make them pay? Ashley asked. Jeff was fixated on the traffic outside his window. Soon we'll all have new identification and visas for Canada. I'm a software engineer who just got a big contract in Vancouver. I don't want to go to Canada, Ashley said. How do you know? You've never been there. How do you know I've never been there? Ross laughed and clutched at his side. Ashley scowled. I'm not going to Mexico or Canada. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to find out who did this, and I'm going to find them, and I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill them all. The tears in her eyes and her trembling voice did little to conceal the child's furious anger. Jeff lowered his eyes to the floor, the streaming weather and vehicles no longer appealing. No one spoke until they reached their destination. Chapter 46. Nostalgia. July 25th, 2308. The transport settled into a landing trajectory over the small parking garage with a T-shaped motel. It consisted of 7 units, 4 singles and 3 suites, tucked away in a run-down industrial district. They parked in an automated garage and waited for the door to fully close before exiting the vehicle. "We'll wait here while I arrange new documents for us. We're going to set up your room downstairs. You can eat what you like. Just don't go outside. There's nothing to see. There's no such thing as fresh air around here anyhow." Ashley and Jeff followed Ross from the garage to the central corridor. They could access all 7 units from the central maintenance passage as well as the garage and the main office. It was obvious from the damage to the walls that the facility had been used as a safe house for some dangerous cases, not all of them successful. "How long are we going to be here?" Ashley asked. "A few days. We've got our work cut out for us tonight. Come on, grab those groceries." Ash and Jeff realized the back of the transport was packed with lots of stuff besides groceries. They carried bags into the kitchen. The children were hard-pressed to find counter space. Ross gestured to the floor as the table and counters were covered with bags of other supplies. Ross coughed a few times, his hand coming away wet with blood. "Something I gotta take care of. Be back in half an hour. Don't break anything." Ash and Jeff made several trips from the transport back to the kitchen. Ross had purchased every kind of pot known to man. Some of the bags threatened to rip, they were so full of metal cups, pots, and pans. Deeper in the car there were several bags of industrial materials. It took the children almost 20 minutes to unload the cruiser. 40 minutes later they still hadn't seen Ross and decided to eat. Ashley made sandwiches, and Jeff poured juice. 2 hours later, after an uncomfortable nap on lobby couches, Jeff shook his sister awake. "He's still not back yet?" Ashley asked. Jeff shook his head. "Ash, I hear voices." Ashley shot bolt upright. Sure enough, from one of the units down the hallway, Ashley could hear them too. There were voices, plural, as in more than 2. Ashley was off the couch and pulling Jeff toward the kitchen. They didn't go through the door, but Ashley fished the micronics from her back pocket and waited a few moments in the doorway. "What are we doing?" Jeff asked. Ashley raised a finger to her lips. She looked at the door they were crouched beside. She could back through it, into the kitchen, and out of the central lobby. Opening it would make noise. There was no way around that. Across the lobby and up 3 stairs, the hallway ran toward the intersection at the end. She looked down at the micronics in her hand. She pressed downward on the stiff button. It sunk a bit, but the blade didn't pop. Ashley coughed and jammed down hard on the trigger. The blade snapped out. It was not quiet, but Ashley's ruse appeared to have covered it. Conversation in the back room continued unbroken. The wicked knife in hand, Ashley lowered her brow and set out toward the hallway entrance, Jeff trailing along behind. They made their way down the hallway, toward the 3-way intersection at the top of the T. At the corner they waited. The doorway to Unit 6, in the center of the hall, was open. There were at least 3 people inside, maybe 4. "I can't believe you sent me to Jerusalem," a woman said. "I can't believe you came back empty-handed," a deep-voiced male replied. "I did leave in something of a hurry," she answered. "Regardless, what we need to do now is work up a believable cover and get them out of here," Ross interrupted the bickering. "What did you have in mind?" the man asked. "Vancouver," Ross answered. "That can't actually be your plan." "Canada?" the woman asked. "What's wrong with Canada?" Ross responded. "What about killing this son of a bitch?" the woman replied. "What about it?" Ross sounded tired. "Well," the woman directed this to another part of the room. "Well, what? You heard him. He asked us not to shoot him. I think the president may have shined him on a bit," a fourth voice suggested. "That's exactly what I think," she replied, sounding way too familiar to Ashley. "What's he after then?" one of the men asked. "Ha, everything," she replied. "Fox told him about MacPhail and the Midway," Ross said. Everyone laughed. "Oh, you're kidding," someone said. "I'm not. Our friend had him arrested, and MacPhail asked for his lawyer, so now Woody's on his way out to Glasgow for some Manx kippers and the keys to the Midway." The adults laughed loudly. Ashley hit the button, retracting the blade. They didn't hear it. She slipped it back into her pocket. "I didn't think anyone was dumb enough to fall for it." "Oh my God, that's priceless," the woman said. "Has he got anyone assigned to us at all?" Ross asked. "The agency, the bureau, and the marshal's office formed a joint task force. You guys got your own federal posse on your ass," the third male said. "They didn't invite Ice and the Marlboro Man?" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he replied. "It's been 24 hours, she objected. "Why haven't we killed his ass yet?" "Are we back to this?" the deep-voiced one replied. Why don't we just jump to the end and blow up the Oval Office and shoot POTUS? Who's POTUS? Jeff whispered to his sister. I don't know. Shh. This is what Fox was afraid of happening, one of the men said. Well, at least we have cause now. No one can say it's preemptive, the woman answered. Ashley couldn't help thinking that sounded just like her mom. Jeff suddenly pushed past his sister and walked into the unit. Mom? He said in a loud, shocked voice. Ashley followed him, pushing open the cracked double doors. The woman was facing them, leaning against a credenza. Behind her were windows onto the unit's patio. The sky cast her in sharp silhouette, but Ashley could still make out the heavy battle armor she wore. She looked directly at them. She looked just like their mom, but her hair was longer. She was taller, much, much stronger. It was her or her twin sister. Jeff had frozen in place, as had Ash for the moment. They looked around the room. Ross was sitting in a deep chair, his shirt off, his chest and arms all bandaged up. The other two men were also wearing some kind of battlefield armor. The glass balcony doors were open. There were 3 rifles leaning against the patio railing, and short-range weapons on the table, with exotic-looking helmets. Ross sat up. Ashley, Jeff, these folks here are friends of your parents. This is Jim Croswell, Master Sergeant Steve King, and Captain Annalyn Snow. How come you don't have a rank? Jeff asked Croswell. I'm retired, Croswell answered. What does Madge Gen stand for then? He asked, pointing to the roughed and faded designation on the shoulder and chest plates. Major General, Croswell answered, pointing at the 3 stars above the letters. You were a general? Jeff asked, astonished. Yeah, that's right, Croswell answered. And you knew my dad? He's one of my best friends. I'd known him since I was about your age. How come I never met you before? Jeff asked. 'Cause I was working a lot, and so was your dad, Croswell answered. Are you working now? Yeah, you could say that. I did say that, Jeff answered. Croswell smiled and tousled Jeff's hair. Complete smartass, just like your old man. Jeff smiled. So they're dead, our parents? Ashley asked. Yes, Croswell answered. And the people who hurt them could still come back. Croswell glanced to Captain Snow. Aren't you going to kill them? Jeff asked. If they come near you, you bet we are, Captain Snow answered. Ash wondered if she were still lying on the couch and dreaming. The conversation was surreal. This was clearly her mom. In some ways, she was more her mom than her real mom was. We just need to be careful, Croswell said, looking at Captain Snow. He looked back at Ashley and Jeff. You two, however, are going to be perfectly fine. Don't you worry. Ross coughed and sat up. Yeah, we still have some work to do here. Guess that's our cue, Master Sergeant King said, slamming his drink, rising from the couch, and stepping toward the balcony. Anna took a step to the side, giving King room to exit behind her. King nodded to Ashley and Jeff. Sorry, guys. Your dad was the best. He stepped out onto the patio and picked up his helmet and rifle. Croswell finished his drink and stood as well. He addressed Ashley and Jeff. Your parents were good people. I'm sorry they were hurt. Stick close to Ross here. He'll take good care of you. He stepped out onto the empty balcony. Ash and Jeff both did a double take, realizing that Master Sergeant King had vanished while Croswell was speaking to them. Croswell put his helmet on, picked up his rifle, adjusted something at his waist, and disappeared right before their eyes. Jeff blinked several times. Captain Snow knelt before the children. There were tears in her eyes. She pulled them close and hugged them both. Her armor felt cold and bulky, alien. She kissed them each on the forehead. Smile, be polite, try to help people as much as you can. Ashley, take care of your brother. Captain Snow stood, stepped out onto the balcony, slung her rifle and picked up the remaining helmet. She put it on, took a step upward, up into the air, and then vanished from the visible spectrum. Ash and Jeff stared at the empty afternoon sky as Ross poured himself another dram from the almost empty bottle. Chapter 47. Baking Bombs. Saturday afternoon, July 25th, 2308. Ross returned with Ashley and Jeff to the kitchen to help unpack the supplies. He seemed fine. He'd changed into a clean set of clothes and his previous injuries weren't troubling him at all, allowing him to instruct the children in the preliminary steps of their new project. Ashley noted large quantities of sterno, compressed propane canisters, motor oil, cooking oil, powdered gelatin, petroleum jelly, candles, liquid gas, pounds of cornstarch soap, and then came the surprises. Bags from a hardware store yielded large quantities of nails, ball bearings, glass stones, as well as real stones and granite shards. Ross smiled and stepped over to the electric stove. He set pots on each of the burners and turned them on to their lowest setting. Then he filled the pots with oil. Once warm, he began to add the thickening agents, the cornstarch, and soap. He showed the kids how to mix in large amounts of alcohol, diesel fuel, and finally the sterno. Ashley and Jeff watched as Ross used a spatula to dig the flammable gel from can after can, all emptied into the oil-filled pots. Jeff turned up his nose at the pungent fuel-like smell of the jellied alcohol. "What are we making?" he asked. "Munitions," Ross answered. Jeff looked confused but didn't ask for an explanation. "Ash, would you unwrap those ice trays, please?" Ross asked. Ashley peeled the plastic from the metal ice trays. Ross gestured to the various boxes of steel nails, glass beads, and small ball bearings. "Get a big bowl and start mixing all those together." Ross smiled at Jeff. "We're making bombs," he said. Jeff's eyes grew wide with amazement. An hour later the pot still simmered, the flammable gel bubbling around magnesium and aluminum shavings. Once Ross was satisfied that most of the excess water had boiled off, the thick gel was poured and scooped into rectangle cookie sheets and covered with wax paper. Ross instructed the kids to pour a layer of nails, glass, and sand over the gel. Then another layer of gel was poured over the soon-to-become shrapnel pies. They were topped off with a wet layer of sand, small rocks, and wrapped in foil. Once filled, the pots and pans were stacked in the otherwise empty refrigerator. Ross showed Ash and Jeff how to assemble detonators from a quantity of plastic tubing and a spool of wire. He clipped off 6-foot lengths and taped them inside the plastic. He taped up one end of the tube and filled it with gel, squeezed through the clipped corner of a plastic bag. Once finished, the tubes were inserted into the pots and cookie sheets of explosives. Before long, the supplies were used up. The pots and pans filled the fridge and freezer. They also had used most of the drinking glasses. It was dark outside. They'd cooked for 6 hours straight. Saturday evening, July 25th, 2308. Stanwood and Von Kalt arrived in Glasgow in the middle of the night. The United Kingdom checkpoint required they dock their vehicle for inspection. Stanwood flashed his ID and suddenly all obstructions were removed. He even gained an official escort. The UK gave international cooperation high priority when it came to partners like the Republic. The swarm of sirens and flashing lights that descended upon MacPhail's residence was astonishing. Unfortunately, Angus was not at home that evening and missed the opportunity to appreciate the spectacle put on in his honor for the second time that week. Stanwood and the local constable were informed that upon Mr. MacPhail's release only a few days earlier, he'd returned home long enough to pack a bag and go on holiday. Stanwood had no idea, but he was repeatedly informed that Mr. MacPhail was some 92 years of age and in ill health. The excitement of the trip to jail had ironically done wonders for his spirits, and he decided quite spontaneously that he wanted to travel. His landlady, herself an esteemed matron north of 70, wasn't at all sure of her tenant's destination. She seemed to recall him mentioning all sorts of exotic locales and freely confessed that some of them may have been her suggestions, but she could no longer remember which was which. When Von Kalt interrupted to inform Stanwood of MacPhail's reservation in Douglas, on the Isle of Man, Miss McTavish perked right up. "Ah, Angus is born in Peel. He has 2 sisters living in Douglas, and a brother near up St. John's," she said. Ross fixed a light dinner on what few plates were left and spent the evening showing the children the best ways to wire the rooms and hallways. Together they laid out a fairly complex defense grid. They chose the downstairs storage area as the command post, running all the surveillance cables and detonation wires through a hole they drilled in the floor of a closet. The foil-wrapped pots were set in front of doors, behind doors, and to the sides of doors. They were also set well away from the doors in the middle of the rooms. Trays and cups were set against a few items of furniture or under liberal pieces of newspaper or magazines. Corresponding surveillance cameras were set up for each position, along with tripwires for the places that the cameras didn't cover. Ross showed the children how to mount an armed cookie sheet on the wall of the shower and attach a tripwire to the curtain, or rig an armed cup above a door, so once opened, the cup falls, detonating between the door and the intruder. In one of the entry rooms, they placed several charges in a large copper tub and set it on its side. In front of it, they stacked a few books and added some crumpled paper bags. From the back, you could see the insulated wires, secured to the floor by duct tape, but from the front, you could see nothing. By the time Ross and the kids secured the last of the wires, it was well past midnight. They'd eaten light meals of fruit and energy bars throughout the evening, pausing for a break every couple of hours, but they were exhausted. and still not finished yet. Sunday, July 26th, 2308. UK officers escorted Stanwood and Van Calt from Glasgow to Douglas. Halfway across, new officers replaced the first group and accompanied them the rest of the way in. Van Calt wired ahead and booked appropriate lodgings. Angus had a 7 a.m. tea time scheduled at the Mount Murray golf course, and Stanwood suggested they make use of the intervening hours to get some shut-eye. In his adjoining room, Van Calt used the Metacron to organize and execute a thorough search of MacPhail's office and residence. He had given the executing officers some idea of what to look for, anything concerning the USS Midway, or anything resembling a Micronics prototype. Just before dawn, the searches were called off with 0 success. Ross chose a partitioned basement room as their command center. He carried over clean, plastic-wrapped mattresses from the far end of the crowded storeroom to set under the sleeping bags. The couch had been pushed back against a wall to make room for the mattresses and conference table. The table came with corresponding chairs and all held boxes of electrical equipment. Ross sorted the dozens of cables running in from the various wings of the facility. There were 3 suites, 4 singles, and 1 group of rooms for the administration. The small patio sported sun-bleached chairs, a plate glass table with no plate glass, and a shallow pool that had long ago evolved into a shallow weed-infested garden. Once they finished setting the individual charges, Ross asked Jeff and Ash to help him connect the monitors and the surveillance camera feeds. The monitors blinked to life and soon displayed the various cameras spread throughout the 7 grouped sleeping environments and their adjoining showers, closets, and toilets. Ross showed the children how to create and label the wiring grid from scratch. He laid out the rough diagram of the facility on a large wooden board and tacked a nail at the top left, where he tied the motley crew of labeled and taped off detonation wires. There were at least 4 cables for each of the rooms, the suites having 6 and the caretaker's quarters sporting 8. The hallway was a maze of nearly invisible tripwires, their charges covered by debris. Several cameras covered a dozen wired explosives camouflaged among the tripwires. There were half a dozen cameras and an equal number of detonation wires running from the garage. Ross wrote numbers on the board, flawlessly remembering where they'd set the munitions. He drew dotted lines denoting the concealed tripwires and doubled the drawing below, sketching the garage. Once he'd finished numbering the diagram, he handed Ashley the hammer and a remaining box of nails. "To the right and up from the numbers, please," he said. Ross moved to the outside edge of the board, and for each of Ashley's nails, he hammered a nail along the edge. Ross attached the extensions to the incoming wires and after peeling back the insulation, tied the bare wire around the nails. It was clear he'd set up the rooms anticipating a rooftop entry, or through the balconies. The central hallway was the most defended position, as it led to the basement stairs. Ross explained how to manipulate the matrix based on which screens showed intruders. If they show up in room 2, entering from the balcony to the living room, hit switch 2LR, detonating the living room. Those pots we set behind the thin closet doors in the flat pan, mounted to the back of that old framed poster, Ross said. He went on until the children understood which cameras represented which rooms on the board. There were almost 60 separate devices, not counting the ones with the old-fashioned tripwires. Ashley calculated almost 100 in all. Ashley and Jeff bunked down behind the surveillance screens. They could easily access the triggers, and the armor plate set against the legs of the table concealed them from anyone who might actually make it down the stairs and through the soon-to-be-rigged basement hallway. The couch sat to the side of a small square hatch that opened onto an empty sedan. The old car was garaged in a breakaway housing, designed to be dropped from the building at the touch of a button. Should all the above defenses fail, Ashley and Jeff would retreat to the sedan and trigger a massive final explosion, dropping them in the car away from the facility as if it was just another piece of garbage. By the end of the night, it had become clear to Ashley that Ross had given the same speech a dozen times. She could tell by the leading questions he asked. He was aware of the knowledge that would be imparted to the student. She suspected he'd taught dozens of agents or officers the fundamentals of wiring a safe house. Ross tucked the children in, explaining that there were a couple of errands he had to run and he'd return in a few hours. "Wait, there's something I want to ask you," Ashley said. "What's that?" Ross asked. "Before we leave for Canada, or wherever you want to go, before we leave, there must be some evidence at my home. My dad had a great security system. There must be some recording of what happened. We have to try and get it." "It's pretty risky. Way too risky for all of us to go. We've got a few days. I'll check it out, but I'm not promising anything. And just so we're clear, once our paper comes through, we are leaving, and that is non-negotiable." Aren't we breaking rule number 2 by staying here? Ashley asked. Have you ever been here before? Ross countered. Of course not, but you have, haven't you? It looks as if it's been through a war. Yeah, this is a safe house all right, but not for the cops or feds. This is a mob house, Ross said with a grin. We got a hold of it in a judgment against one of the families. Nice, Ashley smiled. Now lock your door and set the shotgun in the brace, like I showed you, and I'll see you in the morning, Ross said. Ashley set the Mossberg in the metal brace as he'd shown her and positioned it in a chair in front of the door. She ran the trigger line from the spool through the brace, past the trigger guard, and out to the door. Where the line passed the trigger, she attached the lanyard and clipped it to the line. It was done, armed. If the locks were picked and the door was opened in the night, the line would retract, spinning back on the spool, pulling the clip and lanyard fitted over the trigger, firing the gun. Ashley had been careful to position the chair so the weapon wouldn't go off until the door cleared the Mossberg's barrel. Chapter 48. Battle of the Midway. Sunday, July 26th, 2308. As Stanwood and Von Kalt approached the first tee at Mount Murray Golf Course, a sharp and attractive old fellow rose from the bench. MacPhail glanced at his watch. All right on time. I was expecting more of you, he said, smiling. You were expecting me? Stanwood asked. MacPhail took Stanwood's hand in both of his and gave it a firm shake. The elderly man was tall and thin, but seemed strong and healthy. Von Kalt nodded to the bodyguard/caddy standing nearby. I've been expecting you almost 20 years, son. Of course I had no idea it'd be you, whoever you are. But I knew this day was coming without a doubt. Then you'll understand my desire to cut to the chase. Do you play? MacPhail asked, ignoring Stanwood's impatience. I do occasionally, Stanwood answered. Fancy around. Angus gestured to his cart and a second set of clubs, clearly rentals, tucked in the small bed of the cart. Stanwood rubbed his forehead and forced a smile. Sure, why not? You can tell a lot about a man by the way he golfs. They do say that. Over the course of the next 18 holes, Stanwood held his own against the aged MacPhail. They traded jokes, clever and insightful observations, and war stories about the recently deceased Dr. Fox. At the clubhouse, Stanwood covered the tab, and at the end of the match, which he lost badly, he also covered the overpriced green fees. After a massive lunch of steak and lobster, with no mention of Manx kippers, Stanwood again picked up the check. He genuinely enjoyed the old man's company, but the requirements of hospitality had clearly come and gone. Angus was still one step ahead, however, and beat Joe to the proverbial punch. Gentlemen, if you'll join me on the cigar patio, I'd like to address the reason you've traveled all this way. Angus included Von Kalt as much as possible, making eye contact in general and treating him as a friend, not as a servant. Ironically, MacPhail hadn't acknowledged or even spoken to his own bodyguard during the entire encounter. Once ensconced in a leather chair, in a room with a completely opened west-facing wall, MacPhail handed out cigars. You know, when Andrew first asked me to take on this responsibility, I truly had no idea just what he had in mind. You see, I knew him as a youngster, that bright red hair and fire in his eyes to match. I knew his father and grandfather, been classmates with my old man, so we go back a wee bit. When he first entrusted me with the package, I honestly didn't know what to think, but I was honored, and every day since has been blessed. However, every blessing, every gift, every act of grace comes with a price. I've paid mine. I know I have. I'll go to meet St. Peter with a clear conscience, which is more than most can say. But I'm rambling, and you've been patient. Indulgent, if I dare say. Angus leaned forward, examining Stanwood's pupils. You're not wired, are you? No, I don't think so. I haven't seen your eyes doing any of that flickering nonsense. You ain't got any lights going on in there either, as far as I can make out. No, sir, Stanwood said. I take it you aren't networked yourself? I'm old school. We don't believe in anything stronger than fermented mash of barley and rye. A bunch of computerized whatnots messing with your noggin, no thank you. Stanwood smiled. I know a couple fellas who might disagree with us, but to be completely honest, it's always scared the hell out of me. You don't seem the type that scares easy. Stupid scares me. Putting something in your head that doesn't belong there, well, sir, I think you're just asking for trouble. Angus sat up straight, looked around the room and took a deep breath. Speaking of which, he leaned back in the luxurious leather chair. Is there anything you'd like to ask me? Stanwood smiled. Yes, actually. I've heard the Manx kippers are amazing. Would you agree? Angus narrowed his eyes. He waited. He blinked. He turned his head a little bit and sat up straighter. The Manx kipper rouge, Stanwood corrected himself. They're good here? Angus laughed, clapped his hands, and rocked back in the chair, grinning broadly. Yes, yes indeed. Best smoked herring you'll ever eat. Fresh in over from Foxdale just down the road. Imagine the coincidence, Stanwood said. Angus laughed heartily and waved one of the servants over. I dropped off a chest with the manager this morning. Could you have it brought around, please? I think we're ready for that now. Yes, sir, the waiter answered. Angus gingerly rose from his chair. If you'll excuse me for just a moment, my bladder's screaming. Stanwood raised an eyebrow. Oh, don't worry, I'll be right back. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Angus had only just stepped into the nearby restroom when the waiter returned with a heavy chest. He hadn't bothered to try and carry it, and instead wheeled it out on a serving tray. Stanwood waited almost 10 minutes before sending Von Kalt into the restroom to retrieve the old-timer. The bodyguard was nowhere to be seen. Von Kalt promptly returned, as the restroom was predictably empty. They both looked at the chest, growing more nervous with each passing moment, imagining a rather large bomb sitting before them. The manager noticed their quandary and dutifully came over, inquiring as to their state of being. Stanwood asked if Mr. MacPhail was still on the grounds. The manager replied in the affirmative, a reflected look of fear and panic giving way to one of calm serenity, which he clearly favored. He briskly led the stupefied Stanwood and Von Kalt to another section of the clubhouse and introduced them to a completely different cranky old miser. The two men actually looked a bit alike, but Von Kalt suspected that had more to do with their shared age than genetic similarity. You're Angus MacPhail? Stanwood asked. Have been all my life, he replied. Did you schedule a tea time this morning, sir? I did. Damnedest thing, though. I came down with a bad case of indigestion last night after dinner. That's because you were up all night jawing with that fellow from the old country, a woman interjected. I'd like to ask you, sir, do you know Dr. Fox? Well, of course I do. It was him who kept me up to the wee hours playing cards and swapping fish stories. He even mentioned some of you fellas would be joining him for a swing of the irons. I was already feeling a mighty bit uncomfortable, so I begged off. I even gave him a slot. I think he was right behind me, so it was a small matter. Dr. Andrew Fox, Stanwood asked. Alexander, MacPhail replied. Andrew is his son. The boy lives out your way, if I'm not mistaken. Real shame. Yes, I've heard. Right shame what happened. 1,000,000 people in one afternoon. It's got to be the most heinous atrocity I could ever think of. The latest estimates put it at 1.3. What a shame. Wasn't just the poor Fox boy, though. That's for certain. Culture's to blame. Most folks feel their public has taken a dark turn. Is that so? It is, son. Listen here. Ever since you folks introduced those gates of citizenship, well, Europe thinks you've gone a little bit crazy. With the labor farms and all the executions and all that nonsense. Stanwood rolled his eyes. At least we still believe in private enterprise. And I work for the government. I have heard all that, sonny. Think it's time for you and your manservant to push on. I'm sorry to interrupt your afternoon, sir. Excuse me. Stanwood and Von Kalt promptly returned to the cigar parlor. That wasn't Andrew's father, Stanwood said. Alexander Fox died 10 years ago. You're sure? Von Kalt asked. He looked like he might be. I was at the funeral, Stanwood answered. So if it wasn't his father, uncle, brother, what? The chest remained on the silver cart right where they'd left it. With a growl and a curse, Stanwood flipped the latch and threw open the lid. There were 3 items inside the chest. A key tied to a red ribbon, a small gift-wrapped box, and a card. Stanwood reached in and lifted out the card. He read aloud. What's the secret of the Midway? He opened it. Preparation. Von Kalt laughed. What? Stanwood lifted out the key on its red loop. The card on the ribbon read USS Midway, forward hold. And finally, Stanwood lifted out the small gift-wrapped tin. Peeled the paper back to reveal the image of smoked herring. Manx kippers. Red herring. Hysterical. Stanwood dropped it back into the chest. I wouldn't eat those if I were you. Von Kalt smiled. At sunset, the government cruiser arrived at the Republic's Maritime Museum in the Virginia sky. Dozens of ancient warships had been repurposed as tourist attractions, outfitted with anti-gravity drives and anchored in the celestial airspace over the East Coast shipyards that spawned them. Von Kalt suspected that sooner or later, these relics would be ground up and recast into Terrellium alloy. The Midway stood between the Enterprise and the Constellation. Von Kalt thought the ships looked small, relative to some of the urban sprawl of the new Terrellium age. The east coast of the Republic had long ago become the equivalent of a patchwork quilt, draped over what was once long ago pristine shoreline. On the eastern seaboard, entire stretches of the actual Earth had not seen sunlight in over 100 years. It was a well-known fact that you could walk from Virginia Beach to Boston without ever touching the ground if one were so inclined. Von Kalt thought it was inevitable that sooner or later, every last bit of metal would be incorporated into some sort of gravity-fighting metallic mixture. Some likened mankind's discovery of anti-gravity technology to the hatching of butterflies. But butterflies are still flies, and flies still come from worms. The more cynical members of society lost no time connecting man's continued pollution of this skyline with the metaphor of pestilence. The rotting derelicts had been consigned to a slow death, fit for nothing more than the fleecing of those poor saps with excess revenue and deficits of intellect. Von Kalt sighed. The deputy director had arranged for the management personnel to meet them, and they were escorted to the locked doors of the forward hold, in a section of the ship that was off limits to the regular tours. Stan would ask the ship's crew to leave before he approached the forward section. There were 2 locks on the heavy metal hatch. Stan would swipe his hand across the digital unit sensor, activating it. Secret of the Midway? The display blinked. Stan would typed preparation into the terminal. The digital lock's indicator switched from red to green. Stan would fish the key from his pocket and slipped it into the second lock. He turned it. Nothing happened. He reached out and took a hold of the large wheel at the center of the door. The heavy-duty knob that, once turned, would open the storage area beyond. He turned it slowly and gently. The door hissed as the pressure equalized, and then the seal popped and the metal hatch swung outward, toward them. Stan would pulled it fully open, triggered the overhead lights, and stepped into the hold. Von Kalt followed. The space was filled with office-style storage boxes. Stan would pulled the cover from one and fished out a random file. The aggregate costs of overfishing in Alaska, circa $22.45 to $22.79. Von Kalt opened a box. Diabetes in your pet. Oh, this looks good. The continuing fight against copyright infringement behind the Great Wall. Smells like more Manx kippers. What the hell, Stan would said. Who would go to all this trouble? A loud ping ripped through the hold, and a hissing sound filled the empty space that had earlier only been silence. What was that? Von Kalt asked. 2 more pings, and the hiss rose to a dull roar. The room had been designed for the feeding of supplies, deeper into hard-to-reach forward sections than the outward swinging doors had been pinned over 100 years ago. If it hadn't already been dark out, a seam at the center of the far wall would have become visible, where boxes didn't obscure it. Oh shit. Stan would turn and scrambled for the door behind them. Von Kalt also realized what was happening, but they were both too late. The hatch leading to that section had been closed and locked for who knows how long. The ship had been an ocean-going vessel, and designed to keep water out. It had not been designed to be pressurized from the inside for service at higher elevations. The aircraft carrier had been retrofitted somewhat to accommodate civilian tourists, but Stanway's foray had not been properly prepared for. Neither man had the opportunity to appreciate the irony of the password before the Virginia sky corrected the pressure imbalance and ripped open the hold, venting its contents into the purple evening sky.